Hello and good morning, everybody. What is up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be talking about the true crime case that inspired the movie The Lovely Bones. Today we're going to be discussing the unsolved murder of Debbie Makel. So, yes, this one is a very sad case, if you couldn't already tell. If you've never seen The Lovely Bones, I highly, highly suggest you watch The Lovely Bones. It's a very traumatizing and very informative movie, especially when it comes to the notion of stranger danger and stuff like that, because a lot of parents nowadays they understand too much and they don't understand enough when it comes to stranger danger. So, Debbie Makel, she died on the 5th of October of 1973. So, she rode the school bus to her home in Rice's Landing in Pennsylvania on the afternoon of October 5th of 1973, which is a Friday. It was a warm fall afternoon, and her two brothers decided to walk home from their school they went to, which was Dry Tavern Elementary School, instead of riding the bus with her. They also did this because they were selling magazines. So, because it was nice, they were selling magazines, they just decided to walk home, and this left Debbie to take the bus home. Well, they also hoped that along the way, their walk home was about 2 miles. So along the way, they hoped that they would be able to make some sales. That way they could sell some more magazines. So Rice's Landing is a tiny, tiny town in northwestern Pennsylvania. And at this time that they lived there, there was less than 700 people living in this town. That's how tiny it was. And everybody knew each other. So Dwayne and Charlotte, that's Debbie's parents. They moved there a few years earlier due to thinking that it would be a great place to raise their 3 children. They both worked full-time. Dwayne was a high school teacher, and Charlotte worked at a local sewing factory. And their kids were used to coming home to an empty home because at this time, kids were allowed to be at home by themselves and parents wouldn't have to really worry about it. So Charlotte would usually arrive about an hour after the kids would come home from school. So obviously, Debbie would get home first. And when her brothers got home that afternoon, they could tell that Debbie had gotten home because they found her coat she was wearing in the kitchen. Her school books and her house key was sitting on the kitchen table. But Debbie wasn't inside the house. So they just assumed that she had simply gone off to play with some friends, which is also another thing that was normalized in this time, is that your kids could go outside and play and you didn't have to really worry about watching them. So, and also, too, in their household, all 3 of them were free to play outside as long as they were home for dinner. So by the time their mother arrived home, which was about 4:45 p.m. that day, the house was completely empty. And as it got closer to dinner time, the 2 boys returned home. But Debbie didn't come home. And they explained that when they got home, they found Debbie's stuff, but they just assumed she had already gone out by the time they got home. And although they assumed that she was with her friends, nobody had seen her since she left school, other than obviously taking the bus home. So her parents, Dwayne and Charlotte, they think that Debbie somehow hurt herself. And they obviously, it's a parent's worst nightmare. They think that they're the worst. They think that she got lost, she hurt herself while she was playing. Now, abductions were rarely heard of in Rice's Landing, and they didn't consider the fact of foul play. They just thought that she hurt herself. So they called around and they checked all with Debbie's friends, but nobody had seen Debbie this afternoon. Nothing whatsoever. So The last time anybody had seen Debbie was at 3:45 p.m. when she had gotten off the school bus. So worried that she fell or hurt herself, because, Debbie was severely energetic and she loved climbing trees. So her parents decided to get into the car and they started driving around the neighborhood, basically just to look out and see if they could find her. Well, they wouldn't find her. And this is when they realized that something is seriously wrong. Something is wrong and they don't know what. So they call the police and they report Debbie being missing. So the generalized thought with the law enforcement at the time is that the law enforcement in the community believed that she simply had gotten lost or hurt. They believed the same thing that her parents did. No one seemed to consider the fact that she had been abducted. So, in an effort to get as many volunteers to help with this search as they could, there was an announcement about a missing child at the high school football game that night. The bleachers immediately started to empty, and everybody that was watching came to help the Makels and law enforcement find Debbie. So volunteers, they walked shoulder to shoulder throughout the entire town of Rice's Landing in order to see if they could find Debbie. And unfortunately, there was nothing that they found. They brought floodlights. They searched from straight through until the morning. They did not find anything to figure out where little Debbie had gone. So while the physical search for Debbie continued throughout the day on Saturday, so the following day, the police started to canvass the neighborhood about anybody that might have seen where Debbie had gone, because this 8-year-old girl just vanished out of thin air. They were able to locate several different witnesses who did see Debbie. Now, these witnesses say that she was wearing a green dress and she was carrying a pink purse, a small pink purse. And there's a woman who had been jogging. She told the detectives that she saw Debbie walking away from her bus stop in the direction of her house, while some neighbors say that they saw a little girl as she unlocked her front door and she entered her home. But they didn't see her leave the house after that. But noted that maybe she left through the back door, so nobody saw her leave, which is a definite possibility. If you have a back door, sometimes people do leave through the back door. So there was no signs of any struggle in Debbie's house. There was a bowl of fruit sitting on the kitchen table that had been moved, but they thought that maybe it was Debbie that moved this bowl because, it was something that her mother put out that morning for them to snack on. And also they think maybe it's likely that Debbie moved it because she placed her books on the table. But there was nothing to indicate that there was any foul play or anything happening inside the house. And certainly it didn't give them anything as to what happened to her and what would cause her to leave. You know what I mean? They were left basically it was a blank. They had no idea. There was nothing for them to run off of. There was nothing for them to follow up with because they had no physical evidence inside of the Makel household. So by Saturday afternoon, there was hundreds of people involved in the search for Debbie, and nothing came about it as of this point. Now, her home is located on the edge of some woods, and volunteers went through those woods behind the house looking for anything they could find. They combed through the woods for at this point, I believe 36 hours. They're looking through these woods, or basically a full 24 hours. So when the sun went down on Saturday night, the volunteers are very discouraged and they decide to halt the search until the following morning. Now, several members of Debbie's family came into town to assist in her search, and it's early Sunday morning, this is when two of her cousins stumbled across Debbie's body. Now, Debbie's body is literally only 200 yards away from her house. And they find her body, and they find the fact that she has been sexually assaulted and she has been strangled to death. Her body is found in an old distillery, but like it's found dumped by the foundation of an old distillery. And whoever killed her attempted to hide her body by covering her with shrubbery and broken tree branches. Now, her cousins, the ones that came in to help, had almost walked by, but they decided to stop because they saw something green poking out from where they found her body. And it was the green dress that they see. And that's when they find Debbie. So even though investigators thought that at first that maybe somebody might have moved Debbie's body to that particular location, after the search was called off on Saturday night, the coroner then determined that she had been there since shortly after she went missing. And it was very saddening for the community to think that they had walked right past her the previous night in the dark. And if they had a floodlight shining in the area, they would have found her. But they walked right by her. So they did determine that she had been raped, she was strangled, and her killer strangled her with a piece of twine. Now, the twine was wrapped around her neck to the point where it caused, obviously, manual strangulation. Well, technically it's ligature strangulation, you know what I mean? And then tightened it, and it broke her larynx due to how much force this person had to use in order to subdue her due to her strangulation. It is then that she would be sexually assaulted. So even though she was wearing her green dress, her blue underwear was missing. So whoever killed her kept a token from her, something to remember her by. Her black shoes and her pink purse she had been carrying was also missing as well. And none of these items have ever been recovered. They have never found them. Now, her death has horrified this community for years. And it horrified the community basically when they found her. Because nothing like this has ever happened in Rice's Landing. It was nothing you would think would happen. Now, just a side note, I can understand with this community how it feels to see something so tragic happen in your town. Now, if you're new here, I moved to New Hampshire, and I moved to a town where a serial killer was killing men. And I did a video on her. Her name is Sheila LaBar. It traumatized our town. Now, the town I lived in was a lot larger than Rice's Landing. The town I lived in was, I believe at the time, it was like 4,700 people. So like 4,700 people. Rice's Landing was only 700 people. And when you live in a small town, everybody knows each other. So when you hear of something like this, it causes a little bit of a hysteria. Rice's Landing thought that there was a child killer living amongst them because that, like, who would kill a sweet and innocent little 8-year-old girl that everybody knows? Everybody in town knows. Who would get to that level to kill a 8-year-old girl? So her parents were absolutely devastated by her murder. I mean, as would any parent if they find out that their child died due to murder. They always considered Rice Landing to be a safe place. This is why they moved there. They moved there because they thought it would be somewhere safe for them to raise their children. And prior to Debbie disappearing and them finding her dead, the biggest fear anyone had is that their child would get hit by a car while riding their bike. They never assumed that a murder would take place in their tiny town. But nobody ever would assume that a murder would happen. And now, Dwayne and Charlotte have to come to terms with the fact of how their daughter died in such a violent way. Now, there was hundreds of people that attended Debbie's funeral, hundreds. And there was dozens of undercover police officers because they thought that whoever killed Debbie may show up at her funeral. And these cops also were there to write down the description of each person that attended because they wanted to make sure that they had a log of everybody that showed up to Debbie's funeral. In case if somebody's like out of the ordinary, they have a description that they can go off of. And they believed that whoever killed her was somebody local, and it's possible that said murderer would show up at her services. So even though detectives were determined to find whoever killed her, it became clear that they weren't going to make a quick arrest. They weren't sure if whoever killed her was waiting outside of the house when she got home, or somehow said murderer lured her outside. There's nothing to indicate that there was an actual struggle. There's nothing to indicate that anything happened inside of the house. And there's nothing to prove that Debbie was scared of whoever killed her. This means that Debbie knew exactly who murdered her. She knew this person because she trusted this person. So because there's no sign of struggle, how else is Debbie going to end up outside? Unless she knows exactly who it is that lured her out. So detectives interviewed everybody that was associated with Debbie just to make sure that they could rule everybody out. And they weren't able to develop any leads from this. There was nothing tangible that they could put their hands on that would implicate anybody that knew her at that time. This case would stall and it would grow cold, but Debbie would never be forgotten. So in 2003, this is when they submit several items of evidence for further analysis and advanced forensic testing because they wanted to take a fresh look at the case. And because technology has changed over the years, and if they found any DNA on any bodies, if they saved it, if it was intact, they would be able to test it in the future. Well, this is what they decided to do with these items that they find at the crime scene in 2003. So the technology available then was not available 3 decades earlier, obviously. They were able to develop a DNA profile of the killer, and this profile was then submitted to a national database, but there hasn't been any matches. So in 2013, the cold case investigators in Pennsylvania decide to reopen this case, and they're determined to solve this murder because now in 2013, it's been 40 years. As of next year, it will be 50 years since Debbie has died. So they took DNA samples from a number of men who had been considered potential suspects, but all of them were cleared. This case is still considered open because they hope that there is a chance of it being solved, but that also means that there's a chance of it not being solved with each passing year. Because it's been 49 years since she died. Almost 49 years. In October, it'll be 49 years. And this girl deserves justice, as does her family, to finally know exactly who killed Debbie Makel and to let the town of Rice's Landing rest due to all the years of reliving in horror and trying not to be afraid of who could possibly be around them and who possibly killed sweet little Debbie. Now, I did find a little bit of information about her that was told to police by her friends and her classmates. So Debbie was a very outgoing girl. She had an infectious giggle. She had no problems keeping up with her brothers. She had a very bright future ahead of her. She was a straight A student and she loved school and she had many friends. And this case really took this community by storm and really made the parents realize that, hey, something tragic can truly happen, and it is utterly terrifying that this can happen in our small community. So the writer of The Lovely Bones loosely used this case for the case in The Lovely Bones. If you've never seen it, and it's basically the daughter in this family goes missing, and it's their neighbor who ends up killing her. And she's so basically the movie, we're following her, but she's a ghost to help her family find her body so that she can get justice. And then in the movie, the killer is Stanley Tucci, and he eventually ends up going to New Hampshire, and he's caught before he kills another girl, basically. I highly recommend you watching that movie, because it will, especially if you're a parent. If you're not a parent, you'll still get the same feels and the same vibes from that movie. But stranger danger, child abductions, child murder all gives us the same feels of total, like, feeling uneasy when it comes to where we live. I feel it every day. I am a mom, if you do not know. I am a mother, and it's definitely a struggle bus. Like, even people that just, like, watch children, if you're simply just, like, bringing them to the park, it is a giant struggle trying to figure out if the kid that my kid is playing with at the park, am I going to be able to trust them enough to be around my child? You know what I mean? Am I going to be able to trust that if my kids have a play date, or anybody, if your kids have a play date, am I going to be able to trust that parent that my child is around? If it's like a drop-off play date, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things in society that has been kind of overlooked over the years that we really need to take into consideration, that there is a lot of bad people in this world. And there's a lot of people that still get away with disgusting crimes like child abductions and murder. And it's definitely something that we need to keep our eye on, because if we never fully understand why these people do what they do, they will continue to do what they do. Now, that, my friends, is the case of Debbie Makel. I'm sorry about my tangent at the end, but this is how I feel about child murder and rape and crimes against children. It hurts my heart knowing that there's people out there that will do this stuff to kids. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's case and to the art that I created in representation for Debbie. And I hope you guys have a lovely day, and I'll see you tomorrow in my next video.